All right, so I am more than delighted to be here today. And some of you I know very well, and some of you I know a little bit, and some of you I'm looking forward to getting to know better. So I hope that what I say isn't too much like everything you've heard me say before. Hopefully I've got a few new stories. So I'm going to talk about the emotional impact of prostate cancer for men and for their partners today. And I'm also going to talk about some new work that we've been doing together with the Prostate Cancer Foundation of Australia on trying to improve services for men across the country in psychosocial care after prostate cancer. So I guess my message is we're interested in how each of you are doing personally right now, and we're also trying to change things on a broader level to improve services across this country for the men who are going to be following in your footsteps. So I'm going to talk about a psychosocial care model, discuss steps for wellness, and then I promised that I wouldn't go over time so that we would have time for questions. So I'm going to be waved at when it's time for me to stop. So that's a picture of a very famous painting called The Scream, and perhaps that's a little dramatic, but I guess I'm just put it up there to, I think it's important for us always to remember that being diagnosed with cancer, for anyone and any cancer, is just a really tough gig. It's a difficult experience, and if you've not had an experience like that before, it can be quite shocking and quite disturbing to have that experience, and surprising the depth of those feelings that can occur. Jeff Dunn, the CEO of the PCFA, here's my conflict of interest. I'm married to him, right? So sorry, Jeff, I'll throw that out there. Lucky me. But we recently wrote an editorial for the European Journal of Cancer Care where talking about this very issue. And we looked at a famous book, A Grief Observed, by C.S. Lewis, where he talks about this feeling of almost feeling like you're concussed when something like this happens to you and feeling separate from others. And we repeated that in that editorial because we thought it was really a good description of the grief and sense of loss that a person can feel when they're diagnosed with cancer. And that's the same for prostate cancer, and it's the same for the partners of men with prostate cancer, and often for their children as well. So it's always really important to recognise that when cancer happens in a family or in a couple, it affects everybody in different ways, but there are some similarities to that, the feelings and emotions that go with that. So when we try and break that down and understand it, and in all the years that I've worked with people with cancer, with many different types of cancer, people have said to me it would be nice to really break this down into steps so I can understand what's going on in my head, because it can seem very confusing and very mixed up. And so ways of looking at this, first of all, is that a diagnosis of cancer is a major life stress. And the first thing is that it's a threat to survival, of course, because when we hear that, we've got that news. We want to know, how serious is that? What does it mean? And is my survival going to be changed? And even though we all know these things are possibilities and we all die one day, somehow we get on with everyday life as if that's never really going to happen. And when you get a diagnosis of cancer or another serious illness like heart disease or any number of things, it's really in your face that the fact is that life does end, and that's pretty shocking for many of us. As well as that threat to survival, though, it's also a threat to lifestyle. And I think where people start to think, well, what's my life going to be like now? Can I still play golf the way I used to? Can I still go swimming the way I used to? Can I work? Are all these things going to be the same for me? Or are they going to change? And many of these things will change, at least in the short term. And a threat to a sense of self. So just not feeling quite like you're the same person that you were before. And I think that's particularly pronounced in prostate cancer because it has such direct effects on feelings of masculinity with changes to sexual function. It's just a very confronting thing to happen. And then, of course, if you go on androgen deprivation therapy, changes in muscle mass and a whole range of things, changes in desire, things that change in your body that are really associated with being a man, being a bloke. And then there's the threat to relationships, so that men may be concerned about what this means for my relationship with my partner. Partners may have the same concern. If it's a new relationship, that can be particularly difficult. And even though, most people manage to weather this and get through it, it's still a pretty tough experience and something that does worry people. And just from the many years over which I've spoken to men and to partners and to families, this certainly is something that does occur. So that's kind of breaking down what might the challenges, and for all of you as individuals, you can kind of reflect on that just privately and think about, wonder which of those mattered the most for me, and that will differ across individuals. And then, of course, the next thing is that cancer's not just one experience. It's not just, I got cancer and then that's the end of it. It's a whole range of different phases that happen over time. And the things that you're coping with, some of them will be the same at each of those time points, but other things will differ. So at the point of diagnosis, it's the shock of trying to understand, what is this all about? Being asked to be involved in making decisions about treatment, which for many people is a big surprise, that there's not just one answer, and then having to understand all the different aspects of treatments that can be very complicated. There are treatments that you guys get given that I still have to Google and that I still can't pronounce. Very long, complicated names, and they all seem to sound the same to me even a lot of times, even though I work in the area. So I can imagine how confusing that must be for people who aren't in the health field. So lots of things you're trying to understand, trying to make decisions, having to decide who you're going to talk to about the cancer and who you're not going to talk to, how you're going to manage things in the short term while you're getting through the next phase, which is treatment. And of course, the challenges that you face in treatment will change depending upon what sort of treatment you choose. Will you have surgery, radiation therapy? Do you need chemotherapy? What is the doctor suggesting to you? And there may be multiple treatments and they may be in different orders, and some of those treatments can be quick and some of those treatments can go on for a long time. And it's tiring the more treatment goes on for, and it's feeling like you're still in the middle of it when you're still having treatment. But then finally, you get to the end of active treatment, and that may mean, of course, no more treatment, or it might, but having regular checks on your PSA and other things, or it might mean taking medication for an ongoing period of time. And people often talk about feeling a bit abandoned when they're, you're right, mate, off you go, and you might not feel right, and that can be nerve-wracking, at least in the beginning. And then over time, there's keeping an eye on your PSA and having to go and have checkups, bringing up thoughts about the past, and the surveillance goes on really for your whole life. And so these are all the challenges and the different phases that you can go through and that you are going through. So I guess what I'm saying is that the challenges differ across time, but there's always some challenges there. That's okay, that's life, we know that, but it's still a pressure and it's still a stress. So I've talked about these things already, but making decisions about treatment can be hard. Having treatment has its challenges, and there are financial implications. Coping with the side effects, and you're hoping that you're told what those are before they happen, and then if they do happen, getting lots of advice and access to support about how to cope with them. And then eventually, I guess, everybody aims for coming to some form of acceptance, feeling okay with where you've ended up, and getting on with life that might be changed, but is still a life that you're satisfied with and you're happy with. So having said all that, it is very common for men to feel anxious and distressed after prostate cancer diagnosis, and that's probably around 1 in 4, 1 in 5 men. So most men are finding they get back to their normal feelings of well-being pretty quickly, but 1 in 5 and 1 in 4 is quite a lot of blokes. So if some of you in the audience have been feeling like this has been tough and it's been tough for a while, don't feel bad about that. That's actually pretty normal. And we've done studies ourselves where we've tracked men over up to 10 years, and in fact a study of a 10-year follow-up that we've just got under review at the moment, where we found 10 years down the track, we've got about 40%, so 4 in 10 of men who are just not tracking as well as they want to. So this can be very long running, and the reason why I'm saying that is not to be depressing, it's just to say that you've got some options to get in and do something about that, and you shouldn't feel negative towards yourself if you've been struggling with some things, or if you see some mates who are struggling with things. It's good to get in and talk about what can we do about that, and how can we improve things. Withdrawing and confusion is on there, and I would go back to my earlier comments about this feeling it's almost like being concussed. And this brings to mind thinking about how you cope with these things, and that often it's very common for men in particular to withdraw and be avoidant. And I know that's a stereotype, right? You're not allowed to do that, but the data does show that. So I think I can get away with that. Not all men are like that. We're all individuals. But these things happen to partners as well. They can feel this way also and feel quite isolated in this experience. So talking about partners then, what we do know is, like I said before, 1 in 4, 1 in 5 men experiencing high levels of psychological distress over time. And it's often even higher for partners. So we don't know whether that's because women are more prepared to say they're distressed than men, but certainly this is a common finding. And I know that I've had some communications through Twitter. I'm a big Twitterer, if that's a word. And often I'll have partners get in touch with me through Twitter really saying, Suzanne, we felt really neglected and isolated and we want some help too. So I know there's some partners in the room. So I just want to acknowledge that we're concerned about you as well and about improving your experience or helping you to manage this. So branching out to talk about couples then, I will just throw in that if you're in a couple relationship, how you each are feeling affects each other. We know that, and you know that yourselves as well, but we know that from research. And that if one person in the relationship is feeling distressed and not coping so well, that has an impact on the other person as well. And so what's really important as a couple is to try and find time to share your experiences, share information with each other about what might be helpful. So for the bloke to share with his partner and the partner to share back, these are the things that are making it harder for me. These are the things that make it easier. How could we support each other through this experience? Often one person takes on the role of the emotional manager, so runs around very busily trying to keep everybody smiley and happy. That's exhausting. Doesn't work in the long run. I can see some little nods in the audience, so I think we might have some emotional managers out there. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it can get pretty tiring. So if you're the emotional manager, you need to take care of yourself as well. And the other point I would make is that, particularly if you've been married a long time, you come up with, your habits of how you cope with life. You've raised children, or you've had jobs and travelled, or you've done different things, been through difficult experiences together in the past, and you come up with patterns of behaving that in normal life are just perfectly fine. They might not fit the psychology textbook for the ideal marital, for example, or partner communication, but that doesn't matter because it works for you. But sometimes when you're under increased stress, like in the case of a cancer diagnosis, the usual habits are unhelpful, and you need to sometimes think about doing things a little differently. So I just suggest to you that might be something you might reflect on, and give yourselves permission to talk about what's going on and maybe to make some changes if you think that might help. So this is what we don't recommend, the just pull yourself together thing. And I always put that up, and so I can see people giggling. You're doing this, aren't you? Well, the bad thing about pull yourself together, and we all do it, it's a very Australian thing, the stoic thing, is that that can work sometimes really well, but if things are really tough, just pull yourself together doesn't work so well. We just have done a study that's under review where we looked at the coping strategies of men after prostate cancer. And interestingly, this sounds a bit complicated, so I'll try and simplify it. What we found was that amongst the men who had high levels of unmet psychological needs were the least likely to seek help. So that's not great, right, when you think that through. But then interestingly, the same blokes, if they had high unmet needs and they weren't seeking help, they were also the ones that were saying, I'll take care of it myself. I'm a self-reliant person. So that's makes sense when you think it through, but I'm just sharing that to say there's nothing wrong with being self-reliant and having this approach to things, but if you're in a bit of trouble, it can be unhelpful and it can stop you getting what you need. So again, reflection, thinking back on how you're going and whether there might be things you might like to do differently. So the first caveat I make to this is to say that everyone is different, and I'm not here to tell you there's one way to cope with a diagnosis of prostate cancer. There are many ways, and you'll have your own way. So whenever anyone gives you advice or says you should do things a certain way, you're very entitled to be a skeptic and to say, that's not going to work very well for me, mate. I remember years ago, I was working on a project as a psychologist where I was working with women with gynecological cancer and their male partners. And my job was to go into the home and teach both of them to do progressive relaxation exercises. And I can tell you that nearly every bloke I tried to do that with just said, you've got to be joking. I would rather go out and hose the garden. And so I went, sounds good to me, go out and hose the garden. And so I'm sharing that to say, and I'm a psychologist, right? So I can take a punt at psychologists. I'm a nurse too, that's my saving grace. And so, you know, people will give you advice and tell you to do things, but, you know, you can put your skeptic hat on with that. And perhaps sometimes I think the best advice you can get is from each other, talking to other men who've had this experience and other partners, and see from a practical point of view, from people who've lived this experience, what did you do that was helpful? This is a fancy model. I'm a psychologist. I have to have a fancy model or I feel inadequate. And so it just says that this is a way of thinking about cancer as a major life stress. And there are lots of major life stresses, right? And some of them are big and some of them are little. A big one is I can't remember where I parked the car and I think someone might have stolen it, but then I find it around the corner and then I think I've got a memory problem. That's a little life stressor. A big one is having cancer or another serious diagnosis. And when we have something that stresses us, we have ways that we think about it. We have physical reactions to that. We have feelings and we have actions, and they're all connected and they all feed into each other. And the reason why I like this model, this is a stress and coping model, is that you can do something about all those little things in that circle that are driving distress. So you can start to get aware of how you're thinking about your cancer, to say, am I thinking about my cancer in a way that's helping me or making it harder? Am I acting in a way that's making it harder for myself, or I'm acting in a way that's helping me? What can I do about my physical reactions? I can be exercising or I can be doing stress management. There's stuff you can do about that too. And there are ways of coping with feelings, and often that's just about sharing those. And so when you're thinking about your own wellness, you can actually sit down and go, well, let me write a list. How am I thinking? Is that going okay? Am I finding that I'm feeling tight in the throat, or I'm feeling sick in the stomach, or I'm breathing in a shallow way because I'm stressed? I can do something about that too. And feelings, who can I talk to about how I'm going? Can I go to a support group and have a chat to one of the blokes? Can I let my partner know how I'm feeling? And actions, that's really about ways of coping, which I'll talk a bit more about shortly. So this is just extending that idea that there are things we can do to cope with feelings and things that solve problems. And there's no one right way. The important thing is to be flexible, because if you think there's only one tool for coping with a problem, I've got 5 minutes, I'm going to talk really fast soon, then you might get into trouble. So if you were going to fix your car, you wouldn't go and address that just with a spanner, right? You'd want more tools than that. So it's the same with complicated things like coping with cancer. If you've only got one tool, then you might get into trouble. So you might want to learn some new ways to cope to help yourself with that. Now, there is some self-help information around the sorts of things I'm talking about. I've been talking about for years, and so years ago, one of the support group guys asked me to put it all in a book, which I did. The author royalties go to the PCFA, so it's not going to, it's not going to give me a holiday in the Bahamas. But you can get that book from the PCFA, and it's also available on Amazon. And all the ideas I'm talking about are in that in that book written in normal language with tips at the end and also with personal stories for men. So that's a resource that you can look for. This is what I said before about using different approaches and not relying on one way. And an example that I'll give you of that is that sometimes avoidant coping, not thinking about it, is fantastic. If someone's about to take blood out of your arm, close your eyes and pretend you're at the beach. And if that works, you've done a good thing. But if you're sitting in the kitchen and your partner says, I need to talk about the cancer, if you close your eyes and pretend you're at the beach, it's going to get you into trouble, right? It's my prediction. So be flexible is the take-home message. You've never done that, Julie. Can't believe that. So be aware of your thoughts and try and think in ways that are helpful. Sitting down and thinking, this is all my fault, I've ruined everybody's life by getting cancer, when that's clearly ridiculous because you didn't deliberately get cancer, is not a helpful way to think. But blaming yourself is pretty common. So if you find yourself thinking in ways that are unhelpful, go, is that really true? And is that really helpful? And then replace that thought with something that's more reasonable and helpful to you. So I just like putting up my Stephen Bradbury slide because I like the idea that this was a person who was in a race and he thought he was never going to win that race, but he knew what his strengths were, which is don't get too far up the front, stay back around 6th behind, keep your pace, what you can manage, and if you're lucky, 2 will fall over and you'll get the bronze. Now he says that's what he thought, right? But they all fell over. He got the gold, which is pretty amazing. He's a motivational speaker now, which is such a clever thing. And so I guess I'm saying play to your strengths, know what your strengths are, and be yourself and run your own race. Don't ignore feelings of stress. That's like keeping your foot on the throttle and never letting it off. And so if you're feeling stressed, do something about it. You had Rob talk about exercise. It's a fabulous way to deal with stress. It's preventative. You'll keep your stress levels normal. And if you're having a really tough day, do some exercise. There are other things you can do as well. Men typically don't like relaxation exercise so much, but often just slow, deep breathing is really good just to take the edge off and calm yourself down. And there's lots of these programs on different strategies that you can download free of charge. But often it's just making sure that you're listening to music, you're reading a nice book, playing golf, going for a walk, remembering to do things that are fun. I had a lady on the phone the other day whose husband had prostate cancer and she was not feeling so great. We had a long chat and then I just said to her, when was the last time you had a cup of coffee with your girlfriend? And she couldn't even remember because she's so busy looking after her partner, being a fabulous partner, that she had forgotten to do the things that made her feel a bit more relaxed. And so that often it's just simple things. These aren't tricky things. You just need to remember to do them. Rob's talked about exercise, so I won't go on about that, but I really support what he said about it helping you with wellness and keeping you feeling relaxed. This is on to the new work that we've been doing with the Prostate Cancer Foundation of Australia, and so to try and ensure that your doctors are picking up when you're not feeling well, we've developed a distress screening tool, and you'll be delighted to know that the radiation oncologists and the urologists and the medical oncologists and everybody's come on board to support this project and to say we need to be checking all of our guys to see how they're going, ask them this question about how distressed they are and ask them what problems are worrying them and then refer them to someone who can help. We have a care model that we've developed that I won't go into, but just to guide health professionals about what they should do if they've got someone in front of them that's not feeling so great. And we've developed a position statement on screening for distress and psychosocial care and a monograph that goes with it. And so I just want to, can I quickly read the recommendations? Is that okay before I finish? So the recommendations, and this has been endorsed by all the major groups, after the diagnosis of prostate cancer and regularly through treatment and surveillance, men who've been diagnosed with prostate cancer should be screened for distress and their psychological and quality of life concerns should be explored. This is what everybody's signed up to in this country through the actions of the PCFA. Men who have high levels of distress should be evaluated further and then they should be referred into evidence-based care. So everybody's signed up to this, and then we've added that research is needed to develop effective ways to identify distressed partners and to help them, because we know that's an under-investigated area. And finally, that investment in prostate cancer survivorship research is a national health priority. So we're all behind you, that, you know, the clinicians in the room, the researchers. We're working to support the Prostate Cancer Foundation of Australia taking leadership on this issue, and we are determined to keep at it and to make a difference. And that's all the groups that have supported us. This was all done through the PCFA. It's just so exciting to see everybody standing together to get behind the community and to make a difference. And, so we launched it last week in Parliament House. I have a photo of myself at Parliament House. I got to go, right? Very exciting. I got a picture of me and Jackie Lambie that's on my shelf. We both look handsome. And Greg Hunt launched it, which was fabulous. Sadly for Greg, ScoMo was coming an hour later, so the press waited till he turned up. But then, in an added benefit, ScoMo launched it again. So we have lots of photos of all of that. They're all on the PCFA website, I'm sure, and we've been tweeting them like crazy, and I'm feeling like a rock star, right, because I got to be there. That was all organised through Jim Lloyd. I don't know if Jim's in the room. The CEO, Steve, the chair, everybody was behind that. And as a researcher, so heartwarming to see this work get that attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.